Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to explore why one of the absolute most celebrated novels in American history is, surprisingly, also one of the most frequently banned. We're talking, of course, about Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Now, this is a book widely regarded as an undeniable masterpiece of American literature, right? But the thing is, it's been caught in the crosshairs of intense controversy literally from the moment it was published. It's this wild mix of complex linguistics, really profound moral psychology, and frankly, deeply uncomfortable history.
And you know what's really fascinating here? The very first time this text was banned, and we're talking just 1 month after it rolled off the printing presses in early 1885, it actually wasn't for racial reasons at all. Nope, it was all about classism. You had these librarians in Concord, Massachusetts, who actually labeled the book as trash and proudly declared it suitable only for the slums. I mean, wow. They were just so deeply offended by its rough, lower-class dialect and what they called its backwards talking. They entirely missed the absolute brilliance of what Twain was pulling off, simply dismissing the whole shebang because it didn't sound like the polite standard English of the upper classes. So here's our roadmap for how we're going to unpack this today. We'll start with how it was banned from the start, then look at the true power of its dialect. After that, we'll dive into the clash between society and nature, explore the concept of the sound heart, and finally wrap up with how all this creates an enduring American paradox.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Banned from the Start, and the Shifting Reasons for Censorship. It is wild to see how the outrage around this book has completely shape-shifted over the past century. Like we just said, in 1885, it started with white librarians offended by low-class speech. But as time marched on, the objections changed completely. Jump to the 1950s, and you have the NAACP lodging major, totally understandable complaints about the novel. They focused specifically on Twain's use of a highly offensive racial slur, which, if you've read it, you know appears over 200 times in the text. Civil rights leaders were deeply, deeply concerned about the real-world impact of that language. Fast forward to today, and as Twain scholar Jocelyn A. Chadwick points out, the debate has shifted yet again. Now, the big question in educational circles is about cultural appropriation, debating whether a white author even has the right to write about racism and the experiences of people of color. The censorship target literally just keeps moving. Okay, moving right along to Section 2, the power of dialect, focusing on linguistic realism and social identity. Because here's the thing, those 185 complaints completely missed. Mark Twain was actually executing an absolute masterclass in linguistics. He painstakingly employed exactly 7 distinct modified varieties of language in this novel. And he even wrote in his preface that he wasn't just guessing here. He leaned on his own personal familiarity with regional speech to authentically capture the exact patterns of the South. It was a real game changer. Twain used dialect as this incredibly powerful tool to shape his characters' social identities, their education levels, and their geographical backgrounds entirely through how they spoke.
Just take a look at this comparison. You've got standard English on one side and Huck's Pikes County dialect on the other. You'll notice Huck deliberately uses these formal errors. He'll throw in double negations like, I won't have to tell no lies, or he'll just drop verbs altogether, saying you going instead of you are going. Now, this isn't sloppy writing. It's an incredibly deliberate choice by Twain to instantly establish Huck as a poor, uneducated outcast. Twain doesn't have to explicitly tell us Huck's social status. That colorful, unstructured syntax completely does the heavy lifting for us.
And we see the exact same brilliant technique with Jim's African-American vernacular English. Twain systematically uses phonetic spelling and grammatical deviations to realistically represent a runaway slave in the antebellum South. Notice the alternate use of verbs here, like saying so I done it instead of did it, or adding an S to make it chicken's nose. He's intentionally dropping consonants, shifting vowels, and basically building an entirely authentic linguistic profile. Jim's language, just like Huck's, immediately grounds him in a specific ethnic and social group. It makes the entire world of the Mississippi River feel just incredibly real. Which brings us to Section 3, Society versus Nature and the Moral Environment of the Mississippi. So how does all this hyper-realistic language actually build the story? Well, it perfectly sets up this intense juxtaposition between the shores and the river. Think about it. The supposedly civilized society on the shores, it's actually a total nightmare, filled with racism, fraud, casual violence, and literally cold-blooded murder. It is this hostile, hypocritical world where people will just sell each other out for a quick buck. But then, conversely, you have the untamed nature of the river raft, and that represents this pure environment of harmony, tranquility, and above all, true freedom and brotherhood. Notice how whenever Huck and Jim face danger on those shores, they inevitably retreat right back to the safety and equality of the river. And it's out in this natural environment that Jim truly shines, becoming the vital guide for Huck's moral growth. On the river, Jim steps up as a surrogate father to Huck, which is honestly something the kid desperately needs. Jim proves time and time again that he's sincere, trustworthy, and fiercely loyal, literally willing to sacrifice his own safety for Huck. Plus, Jim shows this deep, profound love for his own family. There's this heartbreaking story he shares about his daughter that makes Huck realize, wait a minute, Jim cares for his kids way more than Huck's own father ever cared for him. In the isolation of that raft, they are complete equals. Jim's genuine humanity just totally cuts through the racial discrimination that society had planted in Huck's brain. He teaches this young boy that kindness has absolutely zero to do with skin color. Let's transition to Section 4, the sound heart, where we'll look at the collision of heart and conscience. So this brings us to what I think is the ultimate internal battle of the entire novel. To really get this, we have to understand what Twain meant by a deformed conscience. Now, normally you and I think of a conscience as that little voice in our head telling us to do the right thing, right? But for Huck, his conscience isn't actually a force for good at all. It's the racist, slave-holding mentality that was forcefully implanted in him by the society he grew up in. Because he was raised in a world that treated slavery as totally normal and perfectly legal, his deformed conscience is constantly screaming at him that he's committing a terrible sin by helping a runaway slave. It's actively telling him he's a bad person for protecting his best friend. And this psychological tension leads us to the absolute climax of the novel. It's the moment Huck's natural, sound heart, his instinctual goodness and genuine love for Jim, finally goes to war with that deformed conscience. Believing he's doing something wicked, Huck actually writes a letter to betray Jim's location. But then he pauses. He remembers all the times Jim protected him, cared for him, and loved him as a total equal. Huck looks at that letter, and his sound heart finally, decisively defeats his corrupted conscience. He tears the paper to shreds and says, "All right then, I'll go to hell." I mean, wow. He is literally willing to sacrifice his own eternal soul to protect his only true friend. It is just a stunning, unforgettable victory of natural morality over society's broken laws. Finally, let's look at Section 5, an enduring American paradox, and how we reconcile history with equity today. So, how does this incredible classic story of moral growth actually land in modern classrooms today? Well, as Twain scholar Jocelyn A. Chadwick points out, the way students approach this book has fundamentally changed. Before around 2012, students mostly viewed the text as a literary history lesson, a window into the 19th century. But today, modern students are way more focused on personal relevance. They don't just want to know what Mark Twain intended to do, they demand to know how the book's difficult, often highly offensive language aligns with the ethics of today. They're examining the text strictly through a modern lens of equality and equity. And that means the painful social context of the words Twain used often takes center stage, overshadowing his original intent to satirize racism. And so we're left ending on this really profound, deeply challenging paradox. How do we balance a masterpiece that undeniably champions equality, completely dismantles hypocrisy, and beautifully illustrates a kid overcoming systemic racism with the very real and enduring discomfort its language causes today? Does a historical text like this still fit into our modern pursuit of equity, or does its difficult vernacular end up obscuring its moral victory? It is a massive question, and it's exactly what keeps Huckleberry Finn right at the center of American literary debate, basically daring every single new generation to grapple with its complicated legacy.